Welcome back to the Epic Flight Academy. This is the Private Pilot Ground School, and my name is Mike Thompson. Remember, to be successful in this course, don't just watch these videos. These videos supplement your online studying. And thirdly, be sure to review this content with your flight instructor. Now, today's lesson, we're going to talk about longitudinal, lateral, and directional stability. When we talk about longitudinal stability, we're talking about the airplane moving from its nose to its tail, the longitudinal axis of the airplane moving up and down. Now, what's sometimes confusing about this is that when it moves on the longitudinal axis, it's moving around the lateral axis. So when you look at this picture and you see the tail to the nose, imagine the lateral axis going wingtip to wingtip like this, and the longitudinal movement is around the lateral axis. That longitudinal movement around the lateral axis is controlled by the aircraft's elevators, and the movement is referred to as pitch or pitching. Now, the airplane will naturally pitch all by itself. If you take a look at this airplane, you see we're looking at it in profile from the side, from the tail to the nose, and notice that the center of gravity is forward of the center of lift or center of pressure. So with this airplane, that center of lift is pushing up while the center of gravity is pushing down, and the airplane will pivot and push itself nose down. Well, that doesn't sound very stable to me. And in fact, it's not. That rotational force is called a moment. And that pitch down moment is anything but stable. So as we look at this diagram, you got to ask yourself, how would we stabilize that? Well, it becomes pretty clear when you look back here at the tail. If we have a downward force on the tail, that balances or stabilizes that longitudinal axis. That's called the tail down force. The tail down force is essential to balance the nose down pitching moment. That is longitudinal stability. Now, that pitching moment will change as the center of gravity moves further forward or further aft. An important point to remember: the center of gravity must always be forward of the center of lift. Well, how do we assure that happens? When we load the airplane properly in accordance with Chapter 5 of our Pilot Operating Handbook, and we calculate our weight and balance to be within our weight and balance limits. If my weight and balance is within those limits, the CG will be forward of the center of pressure, the tail down force will balance, the airplane will be stable. Longitudinal stability. Now let's take a look at lateral stability. Lateral stability, if you look at this airplane, is lateral movement. Lateral means side to side. So just like in this picture, what I want you to do is stand up put your arms out just like this and imagine that you are the airplane. Now, your lateral axis, which goes from your wingtip to your wingtip, is moving laterally, but you're moving around the axis that's going from your tail to your nose. You're moving around the longitudinal axis. Now, there's a couple of different ways that aircraft maintain their lateral stability. One is dihedral. A second one is the pendulum effect, and the third one is the Keel effect. Let's talk a little bit about dihedral. You can see in pictures of the high wing airplane and the low wing airplane, the wings don't go straight out, but they go up like this. And on a low wing airplane, it appears as though they're going up more. That's dihedral. You can see on the 172, there's a little bit of dihedral. It's noticeable. On a low wing airplane, there's a lot of dihedral. Now, how does dihedral work? Well, it's difficult to be clear just looking at the pictures. It's a two-dimensional diagram describing a three-dimensional process. So what I want you to imagine is you're the airplane, your wings are straight out like this. When the airplane is upset laterally, it yaws. Okay? Remember, the stability of the airplane is talking about it being upset by air turbulence. This is not you flying the airplane. That's completely different. This is the airplane's natural stability that's built into it. So here we are. We've got our wings out. Now, when the airplane rolls, it yaws. Now, take a careful look at how I'm yawing here. If I roll to the right, I'm yawing to the left. If I roll to the left, I'm yawing to the right. Again, that's not pilot input. That's just natural airplane movement with no pilot input. Now, why is that important? If I roll to the left and yaw to the right, the lower arm or the lower wing is moving faster through the air. The low wing creates more lift. More lift lifts the wing up and back to level. That's the effect of dihedral on lateral stability. The other big factor we talked about was the pendulum effect. Now, by pendulum, we mean imagine the pendulum at the bottom of a grandfather clock. I think most of us have seen a grandfather clock. If you haven't, it looks like the one here in the picture. And the pendulum at the bottom is swinging back and forth. On a high wing airplane like the Cessna 172, the fuselage is below this high wing structure. The center of gravity is down here in the fuselage area, and it acts like the pendulum on the grandfather clock. Now, take a look at this low wing airplane. Here, the fuselage is sitting on top of the wings. The center of gravity is up here in the fuselage. And when that center of gravity moves like a pendulum, it tends to keep going. That's why you see a higher dihedral on these low wing airplanes. So we have dihedral, we have the pendulum effect. The third one is what we call the Keel effect. Now, some of you may have experience in boating, some of you don't. If you do, you understand that under the water is a keel. Oftentimes, sometimes on a sailboat, you might have a centerboard or something like that. That structure is acting against the water underwater to help stabilize that boat? Well, your aircraft, the entire fuselage from front all the way back to the empennage, acts similarly to a keel. When the airplane moves itself, yawing and rolling, that airflow hits that fuselage, and just like the keel on a boat, helps to stabilize it back to where it was. That's the keel effect. So lateral stability, we have dihedral, pendulum effect, keel effect. How about directional stability? That's our third one, or often called vertical stability. Now, this one is probably the simplest of the three. If you've ever seen a weather vane, and here's a couple of examples of some pretty cool weather vanes. You look at your airplane, you look at the empennage, you look at the vertical stabilizer, and you might think to yourself, you know, that's not unlike a weather vane. As the relative wind moves across my airplane, the vertical stabilizer on the back works a lot like a weather vane. And in fact, that's exactly true. That vertical stabilizer works like a weather vane, and when this airplane is moved off of center around its vertical axis, that wind is pushing against the fuselage and across this vertical stabilizer, pulls it back straight ahead, a lot like a weather vane. So today we've talked about longitudinal, lateral, and directional stability. Here's a question to wrap up. When we talk about lateral stability, what do we call it when we see those wingtips tipped up like this? Do you remember the name of that?